Dar dacă astăzi mergem spre țărul pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome. It is another day, it is another live stream. It is a follow up in some ways to yesterday's, what I will say is a rather epic piece of broadcasting, which was where I attempted for 3 hours to make a debate between a lump of lard and a plank of wood seem like something it was worth your time watching. I hope I succeeded. Tonight we come to you with a live stream dedicated to a question which has, of course, vexed various corners of the, shall we say, leftist spaces on the internet for a number of years now, which is the question of, as the title does indicate, socialism and patriotism. And so we're going to be talking about that this evening. So what I'm going to do is in the style of the new format here, I'm going to talk for 20 minutes or so, outlining my views on the subject and some criticisms of past stances that I've taken on this particular question. And then I'm going to take questions and contributions from the chat. So to begin with, let's talk about my own former positions on this question. Because if you are familiar at all with the work I did on the purely audio version of this program back in the day, a couple of years ago now, then you will know that my position on this has changed over time. So I think it's important to start this particular program by addressing the reasons for this, and more than that, to explore what I now regard as my own mistakes. And these mistakes come from a very strange and twisted and contradictory attitude that those of us who consider ourselves to be Marxists, particularly those who come to Marxism through the Trotskyite parties or through reformism or through revisionism, all of these produce a lot of strange and error-strewn analyses of what the nation is, and also what imperialism is. And these produce mistakes, often of both an ultra-left and a right opportunist variety. And this is the way in which I will be addressing the particular situation this evening. So, when I say my own mistakes, what do I mean? Now, when you say the word patriotism to somebody, particularly I'm thinking and will be referring tonight, principally to the imperial core nations. So you say patriotic struggle to an Irishman or to a Palestinian or to, well, these days, a Russian or somebody from China or a Korean or a resident of the DPRK, shall we say, the most Korea of the Koreans. That will mean something very clear to them. It'll also mean something clear, I think, to most people who come to Marxism in the imperial core countries. A lot of them will understand on some level that the struggle for Korean nationhood, the struggle for Vietnamese nationhood, the struggle for Irish nationhood, which is, of course, an unfinished struggle, and, of course, the struggle for Palestinian nationhood. One might even add into this mix right now the coming struggle for the nationhood of Ukraine, which I think is a struggle which will come about at some stage and can only be resolved properly by actually paying attention to and learning properly from the examples of Soviet history. But the point about those struggles is that they are, on some level, even by, well, not all Trotskyites by all means, but some of them do understand it on a certain level. Like, even when I was a Trotskyite, I wouldn't have questioned too much, perhaps, the Korean struggle, the Vietnamese struggle, particularly those struggles against the oppression imposed upon those nations by British imperialism or French imperialism, that those necessitated a rallying behind the idea of national independence. So I don't think I would have even 10 years ago, I would have questioned that too much. What brings most leftists, whether they're Marxists of any variety or social democrats of the left variety, out in a rash, figuratively speaking, is the idea of the nation, the idea of patriotism when it comes to imperial core countries. And there are certain specific and understandable reasons for this aversion. Some of them come from political errors, ultra-left errors, and some of them come from right deviationist errors. So let's deal with the most common objections first. The most common objections come from those who look at who describes themselves as, we're going to be using the example of Britain because, of course, this is where I live and where I grew up. So if someone describes themselves to you as a British patriot, I've had people describe themselves to me as this in the past. They generally have come in two varieties. One is the ultra rich guy variety. And this is somebody who is usually, though, not from the aristocracy or from the bourgeois, but from the upper petty bourgeois, who's quite aggressive with it. Generally, it's a sort of a Union Jack waving, Tory voting or fascist type who wants to restore some form of autocracy or rule by military dictatorship over Britain. One of my old flatmates at university answered this description. When he'd had more than, say, 2 pints of beer in him, he would always then revert. He was, by the way, an RAF guy. He would go on and on about the need to, you know what, we just need to cut out this, bollocks and just call things like they are. If we just had the military run the country, it'd be efficient. Now, of course, if you know anything about the organisation of the British military in recent decades, you'll know how wrong a judgment that is. But that's one type of guy who you run into, particularly in university settings, particularly in areas that are more typically reactionary, petty bourgeois. That's one type of guy who describes himself as a patriot. The other kind who you generally run into, the sort of aggressive type, is a sort of lumpen fascist type. Who I've run into, again, on various different occasions. Neither of those experiences makes you particularly want to associate with the word or the concept of patriotism. And so for many people who come from the leftist background, so trots, revisionists, social democrats, particularly left social democrats, the idea of British patriotism, British nationhood, absolutely makes them go, it makes them almost come out in sort of an irrational hatred. It makes them want to vomit. And I know this because this is my old point of view. And so that's an aversion. It comes from an association of British nationhood. And if you're American watching this, I'm sure you can apply the lessons inside your own country as well. It's an aversion to those classes and individuals who associate themselves with the concept of British patriotism. So that's where one objection comes from. This leads, of course, to all manner of errors that the left in Britain and the United States in particular make, which is that they make the mistake of thinking, well, these reactionaries who I've run into in various different forms, these people call themselves patriots in various different ways. Therefore, it must be reactionary. Therefore, I'm going to reject the label and I'm going to go down the route of what Lenin referred to as national nihilism. Another problem for those who grow up in imperialist countries is that we, of course, live with the legacy of the very real and blood-soaked actions that the British ruling class have taken to, first of all, build their empire, all over the world, the unimaginable and gigantic amounts of suffering that it inflicted upon the oppressed peoples of the world. And the fact that that is, in terms of the concept of the British nation, that is expressed via the bourgeoisie, via their media, via academia, all of that, when you, particularly when you're a younger Marxist or leftist of any variety really, that grew up in the 90s or the 2000s, all of that also repulses you. And again, that comes from not a incorrect starting point. You're correct to be repulsed by British imperialism. It's entirely logical response, entirely correct response to be repulsed by it. Now, the mistake that a lot of people then make is to think that, well, is to go down what I mentioned before, the nihilistic route, which is to say the whole concept of British nationhood is inextricably bound up with the cruelties and the savageries of imperialism, and with the petty chauvinism and small-minded nationalism that the British bourgeoisie specifically promotes. And they do promote all those things. And that leads many people, and again, if I'm criticizing anybody tonight, I am mostly criticizing my past self and my past stances on this question. It leads many people to go down the nihilistic route. So what do we mean by that? Nihilistic route in British terms, I'll talk more if there's a demand for it about America. But in British terms, what it means is that the left has generally supported moves to break up the British nation, and they've generally supported bourgeois drives to break up the country. So the left generally supports Scottish nationalism, even though bourgeois Scottish nationalism is a joke. And it is, of course, they have also supported Welsh nationalism in its bourgeois and petty bourgeois forms, even though to try and build Scottish, capitalism with Scottish characteristics, or capitalism with Welsh characteristics, would lead to creating smaller nations that would be easily dominated by bigger imperialisms, principally of the United States or of the European nations, principally Germany, via EU membership. That's certainly the case with Scotland. It's what the English middle-class left in particular have adopted is basically a dead-end program that calls for the destruction of the nation as it currently stands, but only on a capitalist basis. It comes from, firstly, a divorce from the working class, secondly, from a form of pessimism that leads into nihilism. And that leads them into this sort of anti-national stance. The British left, by the way, the English left, is also profoundly anti the concept of an English nation. In fact, any expression of nationhood whatsoever, they come out in hives about, basically. A lot of them do anyway. And again, that comes from a reaction to what that concept of nationhood is attached to. And what it's attached to has been, for longer than any of us have been alive, of course, the bourgeois conception of all of those matters. So the bourgeois conception of the British nation, the bourgeois conception of national pride, the bourgeois conception of patriotism, which is tied to, in our case, because we're the oldest capitalist nation and the oldest imperialist nation, it's tied to, again, imperialism, oppression of other nations, small-minded chauvinism, and rabid reactionary points of view that are tied to that. But the simplistic rejection of that by the established left in this country, this is an undialectical analysis. This is a one-sided analysis, because what it does is it hands the concept of nationhood, it hands the concept of love of the nation over to the bourgeoisie and says, well, those are your concepts. And the problem is that when you do that, basically you're surrendering political ground to the ruling class. And when you don't, as a revolutionary, come up with a concept of the nation that you wish to rally the population behind, then you are missing an enormous trick, shall we say, an enormous piece of the tactical puzzle that we will need to work out. And you are handing the bourgeoisie possession of some very potent ideological weapons. And so when we consider the question of patriotism and the question of the nation, what's important for us to do is to actually carry out a properly dialectical materialist analysis of the nation. Now here I want to pause just to actually read you a excerpt from a work by Joseph Stalin, and you can see it there. It's called Marxism and the National Question, available from all good bookshops, or particularly the this one's from the party bookshop, my party's bookshop, CPGBML. So I want to just read to you the opening part of this book, chapter 1, entitled The Nation. So here we go. What is a nation? A nation is primarily a community, a definite community of people. This community is not racial, nor is it tribal. The modern Italian nation was formed from Romans, Teutons, Etruscans, Greeks, Arabs, and so forth. The French nation was formed from Gauls, Romans, Britons, Teutons, and so on. The same must be said of the British, the Germans, and others, who were formed into nations from people of diverse races and tribes. Thus, a nation is not a racial or tribal, but a historically constituted community of people. So, wise words and analysis from Comrade Stalin, of course. So, this it is undoubtedly the case, in my view, that the British nation, as it stands today, is a historically constituted community of people. Now, it has, since the Act of Union in 1707, been a bourgeois project. It's been a bourgeois project, of course, the 17th and the 18th centuries being the period of the revolutionary English and Scottish bourgeoisie, bringing together and constituting the British nation on a bourgeois basis so that they could build a unified economy and a largely unified unitary state that could oversee that and develop it more efficiently. Then, of course, going into the period of imperialism to build the largest empire. And of course, all of that comes with a horrendous amount of bloodletting and oppression, both domestically and internationally. The very flag of this country, known by the Irish and others as the butcher's apron, is a flag that comes out of this period of union. The modern British flag being constituted by something which is drawn up to symbolize the new bourgeois concept of the nation. The bourgeois nation is typified by the Union flag. So it is correct to say that the concept of Britain is born and created by, in real terms, it's the revolutionary bourgeoisie solidifying, consolidating their power, pushing through a unified British state, creating there are still separate churches, of course, in this country, as a Church of England, Church of Scotland, Church of Wales, but a unified flag, a unified government, a unified, though slightly different for Scotland, system of laws. And so this, of course, being the first really properly capitalist state, and this state becomes, of course, as I said, an imperialist one as time progresses along. So we have that as our starting point for analysis. So what does it mean then if we as communists want to, of course, develop our own concept of the nation? Can we then use, as others have used in the past, such as those who are carrying out communist revolutions in oppressed nations such as China, Vietnam, Korea, Russia to a certain extent, can we then use, those of us who are operating in imperialist countries, concepts of the nation, concepts of love of the nation, in terms of building not just our movement towards revolution, but the reconstitution of the nation under workers' rule afterwards? And I would argue yes. And I would argue specifically against my own previous positions on this question. Previously, I expressed the point of view that any association with patriotism, love of the nation, etc., even under socialism in Britain, would inevitably lead back to petty chauvinism, racism, and everything else that is associated with it under the current rule of the bourgeoisie. I recognize now, 3 years later, after I said those things, that this was not just a mistake, but it was a disastrously mistaken analysis based on a relingering ultra-leftism. What I failed to understand is that if there is a successful revolution in Britain, again, you can apply similar analysis to the United States, and the proletariat is to become the ruling class, then the question of British imperialism has to be answered almost straight away, because British imperialism, of course, being in an advanced state of decay, is not just something which, of course, primarily afflicts in a very violent sense the oppressed peoples of the world overseas, but it is also something which rebounds back to us here, in the sense that Britain is an exporter principally of capital, not commodities. The resources and, of course, capital is drained out of Britain. Though a lot of capital goes through the city of London, the capitalist class won't invest here anymore. So what you get is relentless deindustrialization, as Lenin correctly analyzed over 100 years ago. So what you get in Britain is deindustrialization, the draining away of productive jobs, of jobs based on manufacturing of commodities. You get a massive import economy in terms of the amount of food that has to be brought into the country, because, of course, the British capitalists would rather have it farmed in ultra-cheap, hyper-exploitable conditions overseas than actually make maximum usage of the very large amount of land we have in this country. So you have all of those conditions going on, all of which leads to a progressive, or I should say a regressive, decay in the quality of life in this country for the overwhelming majority of people. And thus, imperialism ends up, though there was a period, in fact, when the entirety of the working class, or the great majority of the working class, did benefit from the profits of empire, this period being roughly from about 1945 to roughly 1965, when the crisis is renewed. But ever since that point, the benefits of imperialism have only gone to a very tiny layer in the working class, and of course the overwhelming majority of the benefits go to the bourgeoisie. So if we wish to actually renew Britain as a nation, which we must wish to do, we must be the agenda that we take to the working class, then we have to be honest about, well, we are seeking to renew the nation, and we are going to, only way we are going to be able to do that is by essentially recreating, or creating anew, it would be the better way of putting it, the economy of the nation. Meaning that the parasitic imperialist ruling class that makes its money by clipping coupons and moving its capital all the way around the world like a plague of locusts, devastating one country after another and sucking up wealth from it. Well, all of that needs to be brought to an end. The banking system needs to be brought under the control of a workers' state, and that state needs to begin the process of creating a planned economy to fundamentally change the economic basis upon which the nation operates. And all of that, of course, is done in the sense of it has to be a national plan. Now, to return back to the concept of the nation here, concept of the nation, it is, and I would recommend everybody reads the work by Stalin there. Again, the nation as a community, the nation as a group a group inside this community, a group of peoples who have come together to form this nation. Well, of course, then the nation is the people. The communists must be motivated by great love as Che once observed, love for the people, love for the masses. The masses are the nation. There's no other way to look at it. The bourgeoisie, of course, being at one time a revolutionary class, considered their class to be the nation. They considered that's why they talked in national terms. They considered themselves to be the nation because they saw their class as the productive one. They saw the remnants of feudalism and absolutism as a barrier to them, and therefore they said, well, we are the nation, we are the ones who are driving the productive economy forward. We the bourgeoisie are the revolutionary class. We are the embodiment of the nation. We are the revolutionary subject. The feudalists, the landlords, the old ruling class, the absolutist monarch, well, they are nothing but parasites. They are a drain on the nation. And therefore, we who are actually doing the productive work, well, they weren't, but they were the ones who were benefiting from the productive work of the early proletariat, and of course, in British terms, the agricultural proletariat as well. We are the ones who will take the nation forward. We are the ones who represent it. Fast forward 400 odd years, almost, from the English Revolution of the 1640s, 380 years. Well, now it's the case that the bourgeoisie have become only parasitic. The bourgeoisie in Britain and in the United States are not capable of taking the nation forward in any remote sense. They are purely parasitic. They live off the export of capital and the extraction of super profits from various oppressed colonies, well, neo-colonies all the way around the world. They bring nothing but destruction and devastation everywhere they go. And in terms of our nation, in terms of the British nation, there is nothing brought here but, again, more parasitism and the devastation that it brings. A rotten and decaying culture that grows out of that parasitism as well. And so now it is the proletariat. The proletariat is the revolutionary subject. The proletariat embodies the nation, embodies not just the nation in terms of new numbers, but it embodies the potential of the nation. Therefore, if we as communists wish to be the vanguard of the proletariat, and again, revisit the episodes I've done on Lenin if you want to understand the nature of the relationship between the vanguard party and the working class. But if communists are to be the vanguard of the nation, then we must become the leaders of the nation, the embodiment of the nation being the organized working class. The organized working class being the new rulers of the nation. So this is when we talk about the nation, when we talk about patriotism, the mistake that both the opportunistic social democrats and the ultra-leftists make is to assume that this means the nation as it is currently constituted by the bourgeoisie. That's the mistake that they make. The opportunistic social democrats, the social chauvinists, because they don't want to do away with capitalism, because they don't actually want the working class to become the ruling class, they think that there is a cheap way, an easy way to connect with the working class by pandering to bourgeois conceptions of nationalism. You see this all the time with the social democrats in this country, both inside the Labour Party and outside of it. They think that by waving the old butcher's apron, that by proclaiming Britannia rules the waves, belting out God Save the King or other such reactionary drivel, that they are finding a shortcut to the hearts and minds of the proletariat, who they mistakenly assume are all monarchy worshippers and attenders of the Church of England. This is all, of course, incorrect. The biggest dissenting religious traditions in this country belong to the working class and the radicalized petty bourgeoisie. Read E.P. Thompson's history, or shall we say, The Making of the English Working Class, if you don't believe me on that one. The question of the nation, therefore, when it comes to the opportunism of the right-wing social democrats, is rooted in their opportunism. Their opportunism being rooted in the fact that they don't want to do away with capitalism. They just want to, if we're assuming that they're honest actors, want to reform it, want to make it nicer, want to trim the edges of it, but they want to leave the bourgeoisie in place as the ruling class. That's their position. So therefore it makes complete sense to the right-wingers, to the opportunists, and the revisionists who collaborate with them to take this attitude of compromise with bourgeois nationalism, bourgeois British nationalism. Many in the past inside the Labour Party and some in the past inside the fake Communist Party have done this. Which includes all kinds of like dubious behavior when it comes to questions of immigration, questions of whether Britain is an imperialist nation or not. It still most undoubtedly is. So what we are talking about, though, as revolutionaries, is overturning British imperialism, getting rid of the ruling class as they are currently constituted, overthrowing the bourgeoisie, expropriating their wealth, reconstituting the nation as a nation ruled by the proletariat, which has an active interest in the maximum development of this country and no interest in the oppression of other countries, and therefore no interest in narrow, petty nationalism and chauvinism, but which will need, because it is now constituted as the ruling class of the country, to actually develop a concept of nationhood which will embody its rule, which will come up with new national symbols, which will embody its rule, which will constitute a new or national culture, which draws from the great progressive potential in British literature and culture that isn't tainted by association with British imperialism, that draws upon the great legacy of national figures of revolt, such as John Ball, the revolutionary priest who led the Peasants' Revolt, Wat Tyler, one of the other leaders of the Peasants' Revolt, John Lilburne, the Leveller leader of the English Revolutionary period, Gerard Winstanley, the religious proto-communist of the same period, Thomas Rainsborough, one of the radicals of the New Model Army, and William Godwin, the sort of proto-communist educational radical, Thomas Paine, who of course belongs to us as much as he does to the Yankees watching this particular broadcast, and of course the others of the revolutionary period leading up to the foundation of the Chartists. And so there's plenty of figures who we can elevate and show the radical, democratic, progressive, and anti-imperialist nature of Britain, including people like John Fellwall, the great orator and educator of the period of the Napoleonic Wars, who was repeatedly threatened with imprisonment and deportation because of his opposition to the English making war upon the revolutionary French. Now, this is the correct way to view things. We will reconstitute the nation as ruled by the dictatorship of the proletariat, a rebirth of the British nation, or in whatever way that you want to constitute it, be it a union of republics of England and Scotland and Wales, that might be a way of looking at it. But whatever way we reconstitute it, it will be ruled by the proletariat. It will be a new form of the nation. It will draw upon certain progressive national traditions and therefore won't just be year zero tabula rasa, cut off ourselves from all of our history and then ritualistically whip ourselves as if we were a group of flagellants. No, our removal of the British bourgeoisie from power, our expropriation of them, our final destruction of British imperialism, which can only come through the actions of the British proletariat, that will be our way of rebuilding our relationship with the proletarians of the rest of the world, because the only ones who can finally finish off British and American imperialism, well, that's us. It's the British proletariat led by the communist parties that will be built and will come to be the vanguard parties in the United States and in Britain. Imperialism will only be killed by the proletariats of those countries. And the proletariats of those countries will do it embodying the national progressive traditions of both, the national revolutionary traditions of both, and drawing upon these traditions to build something new, to build a nation and a patriotic attachment to it, which is purged of the filth and the rot of the bourgeois period, which is able to hold up the bourgeois period and properly critique it and understand it, and therefore march forward self-confidently behind the new national symbols that we constitute. I've got a few ideas on that one. And the new state that we built, which is a proletarian state. And so therefore, whilst there is a degree of continuity with the progressive traditions of the nation, there must be, there is also a break there with the reactionary, with the petty chauvinistic traditions of the imperialist British bourgeoisie. And that's the difference. That's the difference between an opportunistic adoption of bourgeois symbols, which the right-wing social democrats have done in the past, and moving us away from the ultra-left national nihilist deviation, who are happy to surrender the entire terrain of nationhood and patriotism to the bourgeoisie because they're repulsed by the certain aspects, rightly repulsed by certain aspects of bourgeois history, of the imperialist history. But the way in which we deal with those, the way in which we overcome the history of imperialism, of racialism, of chauvinism, is to overthrow the ruling class and to build a new country based on the rule of the working class, the dictatorship of the proletariat, which will then institute a new form of nation based on the best progressive traditions of this country, and will build it to be something which is anti-imperialist, which is the rejection of the rotten legacy of the British ruling class. And that is the best way, of course, to overcome the crimes committed by British imperialism. And so there I will leave my remarks for this evening. Right, I will now turn to questions and comments from the chat. So, good evening to Dr. Ahmed, who joins us from Egypt. Rupert Fellows joins us and says the Juche of North Korea is both nationalist and socialist, and it couldn't be any other way for a nation that's been subject to the horrendous oppression of both the Japanese and the American imperialists that Korea has been subjected to. Otis is with us. Good evening to you. Paul Mason returns to us, roaming the streets of Islington North wistfully. I'm convinced that you are Paul Mason. I mean, Paul, do you go out and have a few drinks and then do you log on to Marxist-Leninist YouTube channels? Please talk to us. DBLTH joins us. Kevin joins us from Sligo. Agitate is with us. Robeson joins us from Jakarta. CJ, greetings to you in Richmond, Virginia. Todd joins us, I believe from New Mexico. Arnold is with us. We've got Judith, who says yes to nature and the human family. We have a comment from CJ, who says, I think we should pick up the French usage of Renaissance. It invokes two things: rebirth of a movement and an era of great progress on all fronts. And you know what, CJ, you're completely right. And just for all the horrors being inflicted around the world at the moment, I feel that it is the beginning of an era of progress on all fronts, but it is just the beginning. Spurious Furious is with us, as is Michael, who comes to us from Belfast. Good evening to Zuleika, who joins us. And Luca, who comes to us from the Midlands of perfidious Albion. Almir is with us. Yep, X joins us, and apparently you've emailed me a potential discussion topic. I will get on that when I finish just doing this broadcast. Yep, X, thank you for the contribution. Davey joins us from Gwynedd, and Luca is loving the DPRK song. John McNichol is with us, as is Marius, as is DE. No two sugars. I hadn't slipped off to the pub. I couldn't order in time and get back for the stream. Cheese Cheesy is with us, and we have Marrow with us. And Morgan says 5 minutes late, that's his Irish blood. Yes, I'm going to blame it on that. We have IRB Fenian with us, who says, Ireland, the eve of the local and EU elections. I think independence from extreme left and right will do well. Should be the rebirth of traditional right of Fine Gael and the fall of PA like SF. You mean Palestinian Authority like Sinn Féin? Don't know. I mean, how well is... I mean, I'll have to look at the election results when they come in tomorrow. I'm hoping that Daly and Wallace manage to win. I'm hoping that the comrades in the Workers' Party do well in the local elections. I'm wishing good luck and solidarity to all of them, because the more decent Marxists can get elected, the better, if only so that they can use the platform to expose the farcical nature of bourgeois democracy, which is the primary usage of running for elections. Hello to Slava, who has joined us. Lurtis joins us and says, greetings and a comradely pat on the back for yesterday's Herculean effort. Well, more of those to come. I hear that those two wet blankets have agreed to another debate. We'll have to see how we can handle that one. Abtin has joined us, as has President Jesus, as has Tim Gray. Sid Hatfield is with us, as is Jerry. Ab Stevens says, Union Jack waving, but always look to avoid paying tax to the country they profess to love. Well, they love their class, Abs, and they think of their class as the nation. They think of tax paying as something which is for, to quote I believe it's a New York heiress, something for the little people. But they won't get away with it for too much longer. Sid says, when people talk about patriots or mention them, I always ask which one. Tom Brady, Teddy Bruschi, Mike Vrabel, maybe Julian Edelman. I have no idea who any of those people are. So someone will need to translate from American. Otis, we're not quite in a fascist dictatorship yet, but there are many in the ruling class who would like to make it so. We have Slava says, I think American comrades who call themselves patriots has, Jackson Hinkle's Midwestern Marx, mean they don't want destruction of the US, but to build a communist America. I think that is what certainly what Has and Midwestern Marx want. What maybe Hinkle wants that as well. I'm not quite sure, but that's how I understand the MWM comrades and their meaning of the term. CJ says fascists aren't patriots. Look what they have done to Ukraine. That's very true. The fascists in Germany and Italy and Spain weren't either. Particularly Germany and Italy, they led only those nations to destruction. Why? Because they're an extreme form of bourgeois rule. And the bourgeoisie, as we've covered many times before, whether it's in Ukraine or in Germany, would rather burn down the country than lose even a 1% of their power and their wealth. So no, they're not patriots because their progressive role as a bourgeoisie in the advanced capitalist countries and imperialist countries ended hundreds of years ago. Now they just have a parasitic and reactionary role. Ben Kavanagh joins us. Good to see you here, comrade. Otis, your comments aren't being blocked. I was just not reading them out because I am now doing a new method of presenting, which is where I open up with comments and then take questions. Steve Choke, good day to you. CJ says, fascists neither national nor socialist. No, they're just an extreme form of bourgeois rule, dressed up in a load of romanticist crap. Sid says, patriotism, as I understand it, is merely nothing more than allegiance to a bourgeois government and all of its pomp and symbolism. Well, I hope I've advanced a convincing argument as to how we should differentiate between the bourgeois and the proletarian version of this. Marius says, comrades who equate British and American patriotism with imperialism are in fact agreeing with the fascists and handing over ownership of patriotism to the far right. Marius is correct. Cobra Commander says, not blocked. Okay, you're referring to somebody else's comment there. Right. Tim Gray says, here is a good example. Being Welsh, our family has always cheered for anyone but the English in any sporting activity because Englishness represented the ruling class. There's sporting rivalry will have to be maintained even after the revolution, Tim. The Welsh, even under socialism, will never cheer for the English, and neither will the Scots. That's just how it's going to be. But I get what you mean. Marius says, yes, fetishizing of small, weak ethno-states that can be easily made into imperialist proxies is a ruling class psyop. Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, Guyana, Kurdistan, Balochistan, Scotland, Catalonia, etc. Yeah, any of those countries, if they become independent under capitalism, well, Israel and Ukraine aren't really independent, neither is Taiwan. Any of those smaller nations that will be carved out would just be immediately absorbed and dominated by imperialism and turned into reactionary tools of imperialism. The only way like a Scottish or Welsh nation can develop properly, and it is by removing British imperialism, by removing the ruling class and having ourselves a federation of nations under a unified dictatorship of the proletariat, under a unified planned economy. So you can get the full and proper expression of Welsh, English and Scottish culture only when we remove British imperialism. Only when we disconnect all of these cultures from imperialism. Only when we, of course, also deconstruct and remove the last elements of British imperialism from the islands around us, which means, of course, dismantling British imperialism in the occupied 6 counties. Only when we remove the bourgeoisie and remove our culture and nationhood from being wrapped around this decaying system of imperialism and the chauvinism and petty nationalism it produces, and pointless, false nationalism it produces, can we hope to make real cultural progress? Alex Rickle is with us. Okay. GCC X Pro, good to have had you with us. Yes, to answer Sid's point, the country is the masses. The bourgeoisie want you to think of the country as some sort of abstract concept, separate from the masses, mainly because they see themselves as the nation, and they only want you to be blinded to that fact. We as proletarians must see the nation as embodied in the masses. The country is the masses. It's not anything else. If it's not the people, then what is it? It's not the geography's part of it, but the country is the masses. The country is the proletariat. Therefore, that's what our vision of the nation must be. Marius says, anti-nationalism is just as capable of being chauvinistic towards other peoples as nationalism. Rootless cosmopolitanism de facto is about imposing Atlanticist liberalism on the world, which is correct, as identified by Andrei Zhdanov. Marrow says, in Liverpool, there's the phrase, we're Scouse not English due to Irish roots and demonisation by the media. Anti-nationalism is baked into the Liverpool left. North UK left nationalism exists too. Well, what you're describing there is a reaction to the nationalism of the bourgeoisie. And yeah, you're right. But I'm from the Northwest as well. Part of my family comes from Ireland. And I'm English. So are you, really. If you're from the wrong end of the Mersey, but I'm not going to judge you for that too much. We have our regional rivalries, but the English nation as constituted is as much about Scousland as it is about Essex. So when we win and when we overthrow the bourgeoisie, then we can have a version of Englishness which is not rooted in, again, the petty chauvinism and the divisions created by bourgeois rule. See, a lot of problems come from a failure to delineate here. A lot of people assume that the nation the English nation is just going to be permanently chauvinistic. That's a very pessimistic and defeatist point of view. I'm not saying that that's the point of view that you're putting forward, unless you are, of course, but that's how a lot of the English left think about it. And again, like Marius's comment is correct, you're surrendering all the ground to the bourgeoisie. I'm sorry to tell you, but we're not going to have socialism in one city, where it be it Manchester or Liverpool. We're not going to have socialism in one region, like those silly bastards in the Northern Independence Party fought. Our only chance is to overthrow the ruling class on a national level, to build socialism via the dictatorship of the proletariat on a national level. That's a new way for the nation to be constituted. That's the way that we must consider this. Sid says, wealthy people don't work and working people aren't wealthy. A simple point that needs to be made. Yes, most wealthy people don't need to do anything. They just clip the coupons. Beiju, good evening to you. Two Sugar says, the capitalist class tell us that they are the beating heart of the economy, when in fact they are the blood-sucking abscess. That is the correct way to view things. Cobra Commander says, yes, the core contradiction is the mode of production. Those who produce are alienated, and the more workers produce, the more they are isolated. Yes. President Jesus, well, I'm not going to advise you on your underwear, mate. Maybe just start with something more restrained. Stars and Stripes top hat, perhaps. Uncle Sam style tailcoat. Maybe a monocle. I don't know. Moving on. Sid says, my family came over from Britain right after the British Revolution, Civil War, circa 1660s. Yeah, a lot of people left then, rather unsurprisingly. National security is a term that drives me crazy, says Two Sugars. Well, that's because it's a bourgeois term at the moment, and it means their security. Doesn't mean our security, does it? It doesn't refer to us. It means that it's their way of protecting themselves from us and then pretending to us that it's about our security. It's not. They don't give a fuck about us. They never have, so they certainly don't now. Again, some of it's propaganda, some of it is just about building a repressive state that can protect them. Jenny says they still insist that we mean that even after we tell them otherwise, they're just disingenuous liars. I think you're referring to the left there. Duce's nationalist communism. Well, it's both of it. It's nationalism and communism. And again, it couldn't be anything else, as Rupert says. Lertis says, or has happened with the French Revolution, where the bourgeoisie simply merged with the aristocracy. Well, in the British case, the bourgeoisie essentially bought out the aristocracy, and the more successful aristocrats became bourgeois. But yes, Lertis's point is correct. John Jones says, is there such an entity as a capitalist state? Aren't capitalists a loose assembly of people occupying a geographical location, profiting from the people that may happen to actually live there? Well, there's a bourgeois state. It's a state that is constituted by the bourgeoisie to defend their interests on both a national and an international level, if it's an imperialist state. Most capitalists, even though they have investments all the way around the world, are still rooted in one principal country, be it the United States, Britain, France, Germany, if it's, again, talking about imperialism. So yes, it's a state that's built by the capitalist class for the purpose of recreating the conditions both nationally and internationally under which accumulation can be carried out by the capitalist class, and to defend their private property, as they would see it, from the proletariat, and to defend their investments from the oppressed peoples they exploit. Ben says, yes, we seek to define a viable proletarian nation, lead the people of that nation to victory against the ruling classes of that nation to create a proletarian dictatorship. Yep. Chenish says, Russian self-proclaimed Marxists, true Marxists we call them, are allergic to the words patriotism and nationalism. That's because your Russian self-proclaimed true Marxists are basically Trotskyites who have absorbed all the worst elements of the Western left. Which is very sad when you consider what an almighty tradition of Russian Marxism they can tap into. That they're following the losers in the Western left and the paid traitors of the Western left. Then that's a very sad thing for them to do. Thankfully, though, they seem to be a minority. Spurious Furious asked to do a show on the English Civil War. I will take it under advisement. You are correct to ask for that. Two Sugars says, Wat Tyler was done by a deceptive king who promised to speak, then had him killed. Indeed, it was. Peasants' Revolt show is something else that's also on the list. Marius says, the problem for communists who want to reject their country and its entire history is, where is socialism in your own country going to come from? What traditions will it draw on? It won't, because those people will go nowhere and do nothing. Just as when I was a Trotskyite and I was of the very views that Marius is criticizing there, we went nowhere and did nothing. That's what Trotskyism's for. Sid says, and the bourgeoisie knows that the people are the biggest threat, which is why they have taken every step to establish the national security state in the US and something similar in Britain. That's correct. Abtin says, Democracy and Dictatorship, that's a great book to read during any election. Every single aspect of modern-day electoralism is debunked by Lenin, and this was over a century ago. Add it to your reading list, everybody. Nikki Const says, best analysis. Thank you very much. Did I watch Prince Charles's D-Day speech? No, I didn't, because... King Chucky's D-Day speech. No, I didn't, because I don't need to watch the assembled war criminals to remember the sacrifice of working-class people in Britain in World War II. I can just remember the examples of my own family members to remember that. I don't need the King Charles, whose politics basically amounts to fascism anyway, babbling on about sacrifice when that man's never sacrificed a bead of sweat in his life and never will do. So no, I don't need to listen to any of that, and I'm sure that DBLTH, you didn't need to either. Sid Hatfield says, West Virginia had free socialist newspapers in 1913, the Huntington Socialist, the Charleston Labour Star, and Labour Argus. Argus or Argus, did you mean? All three were literally destroyed. Yeah, the American ruling class have always been the most ruthless at destroying anything which could be conceivably a threat to them, principally class-based organizing. Lucas has just seen a post from Starmer with Zelensky during the D-Day celebrations. My God, yeah. Don't mention who. Don't get Zelensky to show you his tattoo collection. Marius said, Sid, addressing Sid's point, Hedges cuts off the historical narratives at that point because he doesn't want to talk about the 30s, the communist trade union movement, which is a very good point from Marius there. Right. DBLTH is correct. Sweden did have colonies. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to draw things to a close for this evening, but I'll mention Beiju's point, which is internationalism should be respected as nationhood. Internationalism is a crucial thing for the proletariat. It is instinctive in the organization of any communist party, because we're not building a nation which is based on the oppression of others and the exploitation of others, and also because cooperation, both first nationally and then internationally, needs to be one of our core principles. Then internationalism must and will be natural to the proletariat. We can't build in this country a socialist state that is just purely inward looking and parochial. We will need to build one that is capable of defending itself if we are isolated and surrounded. But internationalism comes very quickly to the proletariat when freed of the propaganda of the bourgeoisie. But Beiju's point is exactly correct. When we're talking about building a nation, building the dictatorship of the proletariat in Britain, building a socialist state in Britain, we're talking about, to re-emphasize the core point of this discussion, we're talking about a fundamentally different version of the state, which draws from the progressive traditions of this country, just as the American version will draw from the progressive traditions of the United States. And we oppose national nihilism because that leads us into a dead end, that leads us into an empty void. As Peter Stormare said in The Big Lebowski, "We are nihilists, Lebowski. We believe in nothing." And that's where national nihilism takes you, to nowhere and nothing. We change the nature of the ruling class, which we make ourselves. We make the proletariat into the ruling class. We change the nature of what the British state is. We build a new one, drawing from the best progressive traditions of the nation. And we build a new relationship with the rest of the world based on internationalism and solidarity, not based on oppression and exploitation and the chauvinism and nationalism that comes with it. And with that, comrades, I will draw my remarks to a close for this evening. Be sure to come back tomorrow when there'll be a recorded version of an analysis of the next chapter from the Stalin work on the opposition. But until then, I will bid you good evening.